This is Idlib in northwest Syria, home to 3 million people and the last rebel-held stronghold of the Syrian conflict. It could now become the stage for the biggest and the bloodiest battle of the war. Syrian government forces, backed by Russian air power, are massing on the province's border. Their aim? To put an end to a 7-year war that's cost up to 500,000 lives. They're facing an estimated 70,000 rebel fighters, as many as a third of whom are Islamist extremists, some linked to Al-Qaeda. But the Syrian regime claims that all those opposing them with guns are terrorists. President Bashar al-Assad, that's the president of Syria, has long pledged to take back every inch of the country from rebel forces. If he takes Idlib, he'll more or less have done that. But victory for him could mean catastrophe for the nearly 3 million civilians in Idlib. They face being bombed, besieged and starved over what could be many months of fighting. Around half of them are civilians from other formerly rebel-held areas of Syria, but this time they'll have nowhere left to flee. Their only potential escape is to Turkey, just to the north of Idlib, but its borders are currently closed. The roots of the Syrian war lie in the wave of pro-democracy protests known as the Arab Spring, which swept across North Africa in early 2011. These popular uprisings removed several of the region's long-serving strongmen from power. The clamour for change then spread to Syria, where the Assad family has ruled for decades. When President Assad's security forces violently crushed largely peaceful calls for change, his opponents took up arms and demanded his removal from power, and the killing hasn't stopped since then. But there's hope. In September, Russia and Turkey agreed on a plan to prevent, or at least postpone, the coming carnage. It involves the creation of what's being called a buffer zone between the two sides. Under the deal, rebels must remove their heavy weapons from the zone, and all the jihadist fighters have to leave the 10 to 12 miles deep kind of no man's land. But a couple of extremist rebel groups have refused to go, and previous attempts to prevent fighting elsewhere in Syria have failed. Another problem is the sheer number of armies and military groups involved in the fighting in Syria. Take the rebels, for instance. Most moderate factions gather under the name of the Free Syrian Army, or FSA. Then there's the variety of Islamist extremist groups, the largest of which is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which has around 10,000 to 12,000 fighters. As if that wasn't enough to deal with, there's also the international dimension to it all, and this might really make your head spin. Russia and several mostly Shia Muslim-majority nations, such as Iran and Iraq, along with the Lebanese militia Hezbollah, support President Assad, while some Sunni Muslim-majority countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Qatar support many of the rebel groups. Then there's the United States, which backs the Kurdish YPG forces, who hold land to the northeast of Idlib. Yet Turkey, a fellow NATO member with the US, insists that the YPG are terrorists. Turkey, which now has a dozen military bases in Idlib, has the unenviable job of persuading reluctant extremist groups to leave the buffer zone. It's in its interest to succeed. Turkey has already taken in more than 3 million Syrian refugees and is desperate to avoid hundreds of thousands more spilling over its borders if the ceasefire deal fails. The West will also be worried. If Turkey refuses to absorb yet another wave of migrants, Idlib's troubles could soon be Europe's too.